Good afternoon. I hope everyone's enjoying the lunch. We're going to begin the program now. I think I'm going to hand it over to Provost Harper to introduce Mayor Jim Brainard, who's joined us from Carmel, Indiana. I do want to say that we have many mayors who are part of our leadership in our community represented here today, and other elected officials. Mayor Lynn Miller is here from the city of Norman. Mayor Tom Coburn is here from the city of Muskogee. If you are an elected official, would you just stand? City council or state level official, please stand for us. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Kyle Harper, an award-winning educator and author who serves as our Senior Vice President and Provost for the Norman campus at the university. In addition to his duties as Provost, he serves as a professor in classics and letters. Please help me welcome Provost Kyle Harper.
Thank you, Shane, and hope everyone's enjoying their lunch. I want to thank everyone again for being a part of this placemaking conference today. This is really a special event on the OU calendar, and I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker today, Jim Brainard, who's the mayor of Carmel, Indiana. And I just want to make sure you don't confuse that with Carmel, which is in California, and you don't confuse him with Clint Eastwood, who was mayor of Carmel. There's a little resemblance, but this is Mayor Brainard, and we really are honored to have him on our campus. Since so many of you are guests of the university today, wanted to pause just briefly and reflect on what a truly remarkable year the University of Oklahoma is having, and just have time for a couple of the highlights. But first, for only the second time in history, OU ranks #1 in the nation in the enrollment of freshman National Merit Scholars, with 279 scholars enrolled in the fall 2016 class. That's amazing. And to put that in perspective, OU outranks that means we outrank all public and private universities in the entire country, more than Chicago, more than Harvard, way more than Yale, way more than Texas, who are somewhere way down the list. And to put it in further perspective, we're the only university among all the publics that's ever ranked #1 overall, that's ever beat all the privates in any year. And we've done it twice. Nobody else has done it once. We've done it twice. And those rankings mark us for the 4th consecutive year as the #1 among all publics. So that's a really remarkable level of achievement. It really affects the whole campus, and it affects our entire student population. Myself, when I was a student here back in the day, when I came to OU, I promise you I didn't know what a National Merit Scholar was. But a lot of my best friends were National Merit Scholars, and trying to outcompete them, which I from time to time did. You can ask them. But the level of competition, the level of conversations in our classrooms is remarkable because of the top students that we get. It affects every student here, and I know I speak for the faculty when I say it's one of the great privileges of teaching at this university is being able to teach the best of the best. I also want to highlight a couple of the physical projects that you see going on around campus. The construction is underway, and this fall, OU will become one of the first universities in the country to open residential colleges for upperclassmen and women, patterned on Yale, Oxford, Harvard, and Cambridge. These are living learning communities that will become really one of the cornerstones of the undergraduate experience. They're going to be just extraordinarily beautiful parts of the campus, really respecting our Cherokee Gothic tradition and revitalizing the corner of Lindsay and Jenkins. That corner is just going to be one of the most beautiful places on this campus, and those are going to be real this fall. It seems amazing how fast those have moved. I'm thrilled about those projects and look forward to the opening of the residential colleges. We've been named a bicycle-friendly university by the League of American Bicyclists. Last month, we launched a new bike share program called the Crimson Cruisers that provides 70 bicycles at 10 bike share hubs across campus. I encourage you to take the time to walk around our campus and enjoy the physical beauty of this place that's been so deliberately and so lovingly built into a place over the years by the President and First Lady of this university. Really, we are so proud of it, and of the fact that we're the only Big 12 university that was selected as having one of America's 25 most beautiful campuses. The loving attention to every corner of this campus has made it a place that really is at the core of a community. And every decision at OU is made with the goal of increasing community. And that's what today's event is about. Bringing together experts from across the state and region who can help us build better communities, large and small, who can reflect on the way that the built environment influences our social ties, our attachments to our communities, our levels of civic engagement. And so many people in this room work tirelessly in their cities and towns to help shape public spaces into environments that forge community. We're grateful for all that you do for your communities. And please join me in recognizing what an honor it is to have among us one of America's great mayors. Someone who is the leader of one of the fastest growing communities in America, the mayor of Carmel, Indiana, Jim Brainard. He's serving his 6th term as mayor, so he's doing a lot right. And during his time, Carmel has grown in population from around 25,000 to more than 80,000. It's become a vibrant, prospering city that is, kind of like Norman, always one of those towns that ranks high on the best places to live. It was #1 place to live in America by Money magazine. He has spearheaded the revitalization of the city's Old Town area into the Arts and Design District, breathed new life into the original town center, transforming it into a thriving district with galleries, restaurants, shops, community events, attracting thousands of visitors a year. As part of his city center project to create a downtown for Carmel, Mayor Brainard incorporated world-class cultural and entertainment venues, including the Center for the Performing Arts that includes the Palladium, a state-of-the-art 1,600-seat concert hall, the Tarkington, a 500-seat proscenium theater, and the 200-seat studio theater. Under his leadership, parkland, green space, and trails have increased from 40 acres to more than 800 acres. The city has 100 roundabout intersections. I mean, London called and is jealous more than any city in the United States. It's been awarded over and over for its high quality of life and its environmental initiatives. It was awarded first place in the Climate Protection Awards from the U.S. Conference of Mayors for its roundabout program. It's been the recipient of the Sterling Tree City Award. It's been the honorable mention for municipal excellence from the National League of Cities and designated a bronze-level bicycle-friendly community by the League of American Bicyclists. His leadership as a placemaker should inspire us all. It's an honor to have you with us, Mayor. Please join me in giving an Oklahoma welcome to Mayor Jim Brainard.
I want to thank the provost, Mrs. Gorin, and everyone here in Oklahoma who's just shown such great hospitality since I arrived yesterday. It's a special place, and I can see this university is a very special place. It's a place you should be very proud of. I'm convinced that with all the divisions that we see today in the United States, that education is always going to be the answer to almost any problem we face. So thank you for all the people associated with this university, what you're doing. I want to talk a little bit, tell the story of Carmel today. Before we do, my undergraduate work was as a history major, and I like to put things, I think, in a historical context. So I'm going to ask all of you to stop for a minute and think about the cities we had in the United States about 1900. People still got around on horseback, by buggies and carriages. Cars were just being invented. Not many people had them yet. By 1910, maybe 5 to 8% of the population had automobiles. Still, most of the roads weren't paved. Most people got around by horseback. Then the 20s came. The economy was very good. More people got cars, but we never got above 25% car ownership in the entire United States. So we were still a country that got around by trolley, streetcar, horses, and most people walked most places. They could walk to the market, they could walk to their work sites, they could walk almost everywhere they needed to go, the schools, City Hall, wherever. We're about at 25% car ownership in October of 1929. Everybody knows what happened that month. It's when the stock market crashed and started the Great Depression. People could not afford their cars. They put them up on blocks, sold them, couldn't afford the gas, the oil, repairs. And so car ownership actually fell. And the United States continued to be a country where most people walked or relied on public transit for their daily work. World War II comes. You know, the economy had gradually been getting better. Then in December of 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Gas, steel, oil, rubber for tires is all rationed. And only people who had a reason to have a car were allowed coupons, ration coupons, to be able to drive them, to get gasoline or oil or tires for them. So again, people put their cars up on blocks. The end of the war comes in August of 1945. We're still a country that over 75% of families do not have an automobile. What else is going on at that time in the United States, in our cities? Well, there hasn't been much building since 1929 because of the Depression. And Europe has been through a depression too, and so we had tremendous amounts of immigration from Europe. You talk to people who are old enough to remember that era, and you know there's so many families living maybe in 1,200, 1,500 square foot apartments in our large East Coast and West Coast cities with 2 or 3 generations in those small spaces. We had not built enough housing, and so our cities were dense and they were crowded. How were our cities fueled in 1945 at the end of the war? They were still fueled up until the 1960s, mainly by coal. Remember, you look at older houses from that generation, here as anywhere, you'll see on the side of the house by the driveway usually a coal bin. Many times it's been welded shut. I see people my age nodding. They remember this. I remember, well, I'll just tell you, I'm 62 years old, so I remember about some point, there's no hiding it, you know. About 1960, 62, my dad was a band director, and I grew up in a little town up in northern Indiana, but he'd take music students to Indianapolis, which was a big city, for a music contest. And I remember asking my mother on one of those trips, why is the sink black at the end of the day when I wash my hands and face? It was because there was coal dust everywhere. We've forgotten about that. Our cities were still dirty. Antibiotics had been invented right before the war, but they weren't available to the civilian population because we hadn't figured out how to mass produce them yet. So when bacteria got started in a dense, overcrowded, still fairly dirty city, a lot of people got sick, and a lot of people often died because of disease. So the war ends, Europe is in shambles, much of Asia has been destroyed, and our industrial might's virtually untouched. And so we start to convert all the factories. We need jobs for all the returning GIs. We convert it into factories, literally resupplying most of the rest of the world that's been damaged in the war. And the average factory worker probably never had it so good in the history of the world. Antibiotics become available shortly after the war is over to the civilian population, but the cities are still dirty. They're still powered by coal. The factory worker suddenly has the ability to move out to a suburb, get a little bit of grass. You ever watch Jimmy Stewart's movie, one of my favorites, A Wonderful Life? You see all these themes in that movie. Here he is, the big bad landlord. What's his name? Can't think of it. Potter. That's it. Potter. And here's the Jimmy Stewart, the good guy, you know, helping a lot of immigrant families move out to his new subdivision. And this was the American dream at the time. There's nothing wrong with it. It was a good time for us. But we threw out everything I think we knew about city planning that had been developed over thousands of years. What did we do when we go out to these subdivisions? We could drive. You didn't have to walk anywhere. So we didn't build sidewalks. And that was probably okay. Remember, we used to have the old street grids. You go to the center of Norman, I'm sure, in fact, I was walking around last night. You still have it. Every 10th of a mile, you have a street. So every mile, you have 10 streets. You go out, at least what we did in Indiana, most of the Midwestern states, we had a county road grid, which is basically a farm-to-market road out in the country. Every mile they surveyed it, and you had a road. And so you have square miles. And that'd be fine. You move outside the developed area a little bit, and people could still drive. It wasn't too bad, but the farther and farther you got out, suddenly you only had that 2-lane road for thousands of drivers. And where you should have had the traditional grid been extended, we would have had 10 roads in that space. So I guess that county road has to become a 10-lane highway to handle the same amount of traffic under the old system. And that's happened in suburbs throughout the country. And then we had subdivisions, and the people in the big houses wouldn't want the people in the medium-sized houses driving through their neighborhood, and the people in the medium-sized houses didn't want the people in the little houses with the little cars driving through their neighborhood. So there was no interconnectivity, and everybody had to empty onto the main county road, which was undersized to start with. And so that's the type of traffic system we built, and it got so bad that I read a study, and there's different studies out there, different numbers, so I'm not sure which one's right, but the one I read recently said the average American, and that's including all the Americans who use public transit in New York and Boston and the big cities in the East and the West, the average American drives 100 miles a day and spends 2 hours in their car. And if that's the average, I saw somebody raise their hand, if that's the average, that means there's people spending 3 and 4 hours in their car to get to that average. So we haven't developed our cities well. I understand why we did it. It was a good thing when we did it, but it wasn't planned out, and we threw out thousands of years of city planning. Anybody ever walk into the British Museum in London? First thing you see is a Rosetta Stone, and I don't mean the foreign language tape thing you see at the airports, the real Rosetta Stone that allowed us to translate for the first time the hieroglyphics. Well, as we started to translate these things, they suddenly realized one of the first stones or whatever they were translating talked about, well, the building should be so tall if the street is so wide. It was a city planning guide. So these aren't new ideas. People have been doing this for a long time. We knew how to build in our culture and our civilization beautiful, functioning cities that were walkable. Dating back to the Romans, you even look at go to Pompeii and you see they use the streets as gutters. They had sidewalks, and since the streets were basically the gutters, when it rained, they had stepping stones at all the crosswalks. And of course, those stepping stones were uniform size throughout the entire Roman Empire, so the carts could be a uniform size and travel over, and they had to be so high to clear. So these aren't new ideas about how to plan cities. By nature, up until the time that we invented the car, cities had to be walkable for defensive purposes, for lots of purposes. So I ran for mayor for the first time in 1995. And as we talked about how technology and the car changed how we built cities, something else that happened about then too. And remember the date it happened because I had a daughter born later that same day. I was a practicing lawyer, and it used to be that even though I was living in a suburban community, I had to drive to downtown Indianapolis. We share a street with the city of Indianapolis, about a 2 million metro area. Carmel is the largest edge city. Used to be a suburb. I call it an edge city now. And I drive downtown every day, so I needed to be near the title insurance companies. I needed to be near the courthouse. I needed to be near the other attorneys. I needed to be near the CPAs that my clients used, this whole group of professionals. And that was the case for many people living in the suburbs. The business community was still centered in that traditional community. On November 9th, 1991, I got a call. That was Murray, my third child that was born that afternoon. But I was still in the office, and I got a call from a friend of mine who was also a client. He said, I want you to go to the pharmacy, the drugstore, and buy this software program for $1. He said, it'll allow me to send you the contracts that I want you to review, and I won't have to hand deliver them anymore. And I said, is it like that CompuServe thing? Now, some of you know what I'm talking about. Because I hated that. I tried it and hated it. He said, no, this is one called America Online 1.0. there's a really good interface on it. And so I went over to the drugstore, paid my $1, and got it, installed it, with the old dial tones, and started with this one client. And it occurred to me about a week later, my office doesn't need to be downtown anymore because this is going to take off. I can be close to my house and save 45 minutes in the AM rush and 45 minutes in the PM rush and not have that drive, the expense of driving, the hassle of driving, and so on. And so that, the Internet, I think, and the ability to transmit documents across the Internet was what enabled a lot of suburbs to suddenly say, wait a minute, these are our new cities of the next century. And a lot of people living in suburbs. Most of the country lives in suburbs today, not the traditional cities. And so when I ran for mayor a few years later, I heard from people over and over again, I wish I could walk to dinner. I wish I could walk to a show. I wish I didn't have to get in my car. Thousands, I knocked on lots of doors. I was trying to knock off an incumbent, which we did. And talked to a lot of people at their front door and asked them what their hopes and aspirations and dreams were for their community. And that's what I heard over and over. It was a theme I heard thousands of times about the walkability, about pedestrian friendliness, about getting out of their car, about traditional cities, is what they were talking about, the cities they remembered that their grandparents lived in 50, 60 years earlier, where people sat on front porches, where they talked to their neighbors, the houses were closer together. You could actually walk somewhere you needed to go. So we started to think about, okay, how do we change our city? And I started to, in this campaign, ask people, where do you think Carmel's downtown is? I got 5 different answers. I heard over and over again, there was no center. We had the commercial core, we had the old little village from when it was still under 1,000 people at the end of World War II. We had a city hall area that was newer, a municipal complex had been built off one of the main streets. We had a big park with some nice homes around it. People had different ideas about where their downtown really was. There was no center. So started to think about those things. So it was in that context that I thought, how do we build a traditional city that I hear people saying they want? Let me show you first. Oh, there's City Hall. That was built in the mid-'80s. The provost mentioned this. This is a good day for a mayor when Matt Lauer announces that you're the best. I knew we were in the final 10, and I was at home. It was early in the morning, and a little TV in the bathroom, and I heard them announce 5, 4, 3, and 2. I thought, oh, well, we didn't make it. And then I kind of looked out the corner of my eye, and they were zooming in on Indiana. I thought, oh, my gosh. It was a good day. There we are in Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. We share a street with Indianapolis, and there we are within the state. Indianapolis was put in the very geographic center of the state back in the 1840s, in spite of the fact it was a swamp and half the original. But it was the geographic center, and they wanted it there. The first, I think they lost about half, the first winter, about half the settlers to malaria. Seriously. So when I'm on the road, when I'm out talking about Carmel in other states, trying to do economic development, this, and sometimes my own citizens, my own constituents, I pop this slide up first. And I say, this is not Carmel. And as you may recognize, this is San Diego. You know it's 72 because it's always 72. You know, a bad weather day there is 70 or 74. Mountains, ocean, palm trees, sailboats. It doesn't get much better, except for housing prices. Then I pop this up, and I say, this isn't Carmel either. That actually happens to be Aspen Mountain at twilight. Then I show this beach. This isn't Carmel. Then I pop this picture up, and I say, this is our palette. This is what we have to work with. Not that much different than what you have to work with here. It's flat, no mountains, no oceans. You have better weather than we do. We get a lot of snow in the winter and just get the same amount, maybe not quite as much humidity, but pretty darn close in the summer. So then I pop up this picture, and I say, they're just like we are. They have no mountains, they have no oceans, and they have lousy weather too. it rains too much. But they did just fine building one of the most, if not the most beautiful city in the world. And if they can do it, we can do it. So we had our little village area. It was about 4 blocks long. Carmel today is 49 square miles. By contrast, Island of Manhattan, the land area, is only 27 square miles. So it's a big area, and the original little village was only slightly less than 1 square mile. And so we took that area, and we thought, that little downtown area is not big enough to serve a city of 50 square miles. So what do we do with this area? We had a lot of public money invested in a high school and a beautiful library in that area, an elementary school and junior high, and it wasn't doing well. Carmel had been founded by the Friends Church, the Quakers, and they didn't believe in fancy houses. They had little simple shacks for the most part that were falling down after 100 years. So we didn't have a lot of fancy Victorians to save or other nice houses. We did have a Carnegie Library, which was worth saving, and some others. So what we did in this old village area, we said, let's turn it into specialty retail. Let's do an art and design district. So what we did, we put up 4 of these archways. So you can see, oops, wrong slide. You can see it there. There's brick pylons on the side. You see it at night. It's lit, Carmel Art and Design District. We did it on all 4 sides going into this center core so that people knew when they had arrived. Now, you recognize that we did this. We didn't have one art gallery or one art-related business yet. And my opponent, that campaign, sent out a postcard that had 200. It was the cost of one of those archways was about $200,000 back in the late 90s. And he sent out and of course, photoshopped the $200,000 price tag on, hanging onto the archway. But the community understood what we were trying to do, and we won that election handily. Today we have over 120 art-related businesses in that area about 15 years later because we started talking to gallery owners. We started talking to people in the design industry. We visited other design districts. We created a brand. We created a marketing plan, and it worked. And those little houses that the Quakers have built, we passed an overlay zoning ordinance over it so that anything built, and we did it early on, fortunately, so anything built in that area had to have reduced setbacks, they had to have front porches, the garages had to feed onto the old alleys, and so on. So it fit. The new homes, we weren't getting any at that point. It was still a struggling area. But since then, those little houses that were selling for $50,000 back in 1996 and 97, the houses as teardowns today are selling for $300,000 and $400,000, and the new houses are close to $1 million. And these are art and craft design houses on 60-foot wide lots because people are selling their big mansions on the west side of town because they want to be able to walk to restaurants. They want to be able to walk to our trail system. At the same time, we had started our trail system. We had a rail to trail project. We had to actually condemn 246. So how many lawyers are in the room? There's a few. There's different types of deeds. One type is a reversionary deed, and that means that when the use for which the deed was given, like landowner or farmer gave it to a railway company in 1860, and when it's to pull up those rails, it reverts back to the original parcel from which it was separated in 1860. And so we had 246 of those we had to go reacquire. And there was a lawsuit between the train company and the homeowners as to who got our money. The train company was saying they're not reversionary deeds. They were regular deeds, warranty deeds. We want the money. We want Carmel's money. And the homeowners are saying in a class action case where they're all combined, saying we want it. So we didn't even know who to close with. We had to close in the trust. And we had to do it 246 times to get the hub of our trail system back. But that trail system connects, that particular trail, 5.5 miles, connects all of our amenities, our high school, our major shopping areas, the art and design district, our new downtown that I'll talk about in a minute, several of our parks, and so on. In addition to that trail, then we did another 183 miles linking up to that major hub of a trail. That was a challenge. This was the first public-private partnership we did. We started to think about why people didn't walk past businesses. Anybody go for a romantic walk with your spouse or significant other past the Walmart parking lot lately? We know we can do better. We can create streetscapes where there's flowers, public sculpture, benches, and we know that people feel more comfortable. There's rows of cars parked along the street. The traffic's not going too fast. We're fortunate we didn't have any one-way streets. We didn't have any in the city, and we've made sure that we didn't build any because that increases the traffic too much. But we created, cities spend so much money on streets. Those of you who are elected officials in the crowd know this, but in Indiana, this isn't New York or California, but in Indiana, $10 million a mile to build a 2-lane street from scratch. And then you have to repave it and police it and run water lines and sanitary sewer lines and all those costs as well. So the sprawl that we had been building was very, very expensive. And so we started to look at how do people react? We're spending so much money on streets. Can we do a better job? How do we get back to that grid system? We were struggling with all these questions. How do we retrofit a suburban community that doesn't have a grid, try to get it back to a system like that? So this was a building that was built just about 13 years ago now. It was our first public-private partnership. It looks, I think, as if it could have been built 100 years ago. But the city bought the property, and to entice the first amount of capital into this art and design district, I think we did give the land away to the developer for $1. But then we had, in return for that, we said we want a 3-story building. We want the parking behind. It's pretty simple. We want some decorative brick on the front. We want it to pick up the designs in our old Carnegie Library. We want sculpture. We want you to pay for some sculpture on the street and so on. And so that was our first public-private partnership. That was the main corner. The building in the top was what we had in the beginning. That was the day they were moving out. It finally occurred to us we'd all take a picture. It had been selling used furniture, and so they'd have a couch out there with $5 on it, and the mice were free. And we did another public-private partnership and replaced it with the buildings you see at the bottom of the photograph. Again, bring the buildings up to the street, just putting parking in the back. Fairly simple for those. You can see there's another building farther down the street. And so we started to get some investment in this 4-block area. Now the building on the left is the newest one. That just opened 2 years ago. It's called Sophia Square. And that actually has a 2-level underground parking garage, which is why we were able to go 5 levels. And so we allow the property taxes, 80% of them, to be used to amortize a loan for 20 years to pay for that parking structure. The developer never could have made any money had they tried to do that by themselves. Land cost so little where we live, probably the same here, that it didn't make any sense. But then you look at it from a tax standpoint. You don't have a whiteboard, but think of 2 options here. I'm going to do option A first. 10,000 square foot building on a 40,000 square foot lot. Now we charge about $2 a square foot for property tax. So that means on that 40,000 square foot site we're getting $20,000 a year. But that's all we can build in terms of square footage and still service park it. Now if we did this, that's 40,000 square feet times 5 stories, that's 200,000 square feet on the same 40,000 square foot lot, times 2, that's 400,000 versus 20,000. I can afford some flowers and some public sculpture with that happening every year and still pay for that garage. And that's just the revenue side for property tax. Now, for that same amount of capital investment, had we done the traditional development, we would have needed that road to go 15, 20 times as far probably. We would have needed the sewer line, the water line, the electric line, the gas line, The police would have had to go that much farther. You would have needed a fire station that much sooner. And so we're trying to build the very center core of our city, much like Western Europe was built for centuries prior to structural steel, 5 to 6 stories. It's enough density to support the retail and the people living above it on one side of that four-sided building, so we get some ground level retail that will actually work. We can recognize the fact that people still have cars and they need to put them somewhere when they're not in them. We hope to get to the point where people don't need cars in this area. They can walk almost everywhere they need to go, and we're very close to that. In fact, we're starting to look at whether a streetcar makes some sense, because now we have about a dozen 5-story buildings in this area, and we want to connect them with some sort of public transit. But there you see the street as it is today. That's another view of it. Again, I have a pointer. You can see it. That building is another one of our public-private partnerships. Had 4 condos in the top 2 floors and an art gallery in the bottom that we recruited from Los Angeles. And there's the first building that we did, the before and after. You can see the difference. This was another site in the Art and Design District that had been a grocery store, had been turned into a liquor store. The building on the left was empty, and so we bought the land again, aggregated the land. Every public-private partnership is a little bit different, but our redevelopment commission bought the land, tore it down, made sure the site was environmentally ready to build on, went to several developers, said we want a design center built. Today, again, it's within those archways, we have 85 design-related businesses in that building. It's the Indiana Design Center. So if you're building a new house or furnishing a new business, that's where you go. Everything's under one roof. We have designers who are members, and we have a 100-car underground parking garage you can't see. Again, so it can come up to the street. We try to do a lot of festivals, community events that bring the community together almost every week in the summer. We think that's important for community spirit. And we take advantage of those events to always have a booth and teach people about what we're doing in terms of our redevelopment and why. It's a way to communicate with our public as well, with our constituents as well. That happens to be the International Arts Festival last weekend in September. We also put we spend about 2% of our general fund revenues on public sculpture. About 5% on the arts, but 2% just on public sculpture. We have, in this case, we used mainly the Stuart Johnsons. It's kind of we had the largest outdoor collection of his work, which is meant to be American life in the 1960s and early 70s. If you look at the clothes that people have on, there's a lot of corduroys and bell bottoms. For those of you who know what I'm talking about. Of course, this is fun too. With the iconic picture of the nurse kissing the sailor, came out of the New York Times on Victory in Japan Day, I think, in August 8th of '45, and we see a lot of 90-year-olds that remember that. There's a little dress store just to the right of the statue, and the proprietor says she's out there at least 5 or 6 times a day taking pictures of 90-year-olds who want to recreate the pose. And that's one of the things we love about this type of sculpture is the public has fun with it. They dress them up. If we've got a big game, there would be you have a rivalry with some place called Texas, I think, and we have the same thing, but it's Purdue and Indiana University go back and forth. And so one day they may be in a Purdue shirt, the next day somebody's replaced it with an IU shirt. They have a lot of fun with these sculptures. But that little area wasn't big enough to be a downtown for our eventual size, and we knew that. We fixed it. It's thriving today. We're still doing a couple more public-private partnerships. We had a groundbreaking for a $60 million project and one more block just last Tuesday. But 4 blocks south, we had the Kroger Company left us that when they moved across the street. There was an abandoned strip mall from the 1970s. And there were about 60 acres behind it. It had never been developed. So our redevelopment commission bought 88 acres, decided to master plan a new downtown. Again, it's on our main biking, walking trail. And we had a lot of community input. We used a lot of different experts from different places. We had one architect from England to critique it, because I think sometimes the Europeans look at things differently than we do, because they're so used to working in smaller spaces. We just weren't used to it. So picture on the right was that was probably rendition 117 or something, but that's basically the way it looked about 12 years ago. The design, big center mall right back in front of the building with the columns is our trail running left to right. See the tower in the background, that's a concert hall on the left, and a theater building on the right that hides the parking structure. And then you look at the picture in the bottom, and that's the way it looked last fall. So we're quite a ways there. We've had about 70 buildings built within the city center area to date. And we financed our concert hall. I'll show you pictures of it later. That and the two theaters were a $175 million project. We did it entirely with government money using TIF, while keeping, and this is important in a state like Indiana, while keeping our property taxes in the lowest 5% of all the cities in the state. We kept attracting businesses. The more we did, the more corporate headquarters. Back to that picture, of San Diego and Aspen and the beaches. We're going to do economic development only if we build a beautiful place with culture, with trails, with flowers, with trees. We don't have those natural amenities. So doing all these things was critical to our ability to be able to compete with places like San Diego. There it is. There's our farmers market going on a Saturday morning. We get about 4,000 people. The bottom picture is one of the small plazas in the city center. There's actually an underground parking level underneath that plaza, underneath a large portion. That city center, we built it on a podium. Parking's all underground. Again, using TIF to do that, tax incremental finance. Does everybody know what tax incremental finance is? Let me make sure it's... for those of you who don't work in this every day, you may not. It's saying, okay, we know if a new building is going to be built, it's going to pay X in property tax forever, within a range. And so we take that revenue stream, borrow money against that future revenue stream, and allow that money then to be spent to support that development, to get things we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get, that wouldn't have been provided by the private sector. I'm convinced it's when you get the public sector and the private sector working together that wonderful things can happen. So many times, you still have to regulate, but I keep that the regulators, I keep them separate from the redevelopment commission, because their job is to work with the private developer. And quite honestly, if we're helping a developer upgrade his put a parking garage in and doing all these extra things, it's very easy for me to go back to the developer. We want a little better architecture. We want this, we want that, and it's a negotiation, but it works. There's the front of our city center. We built a Veterans Memorial in the middle of it. Indiana artist named Bill Wolf designed some women and some man lifting a flag. Of course, we have all the service flags as well as the U.S. flag and the MIA POW flag flying, but it's a place right out in the middle of our city where our veterans can have their ceremonies and remember their service. We thought it was important not to put it in the back corner of a park somewhere. These are buildings that have been built in our city center. Top left, you'll see the trail running past, about to go in a tunnel on the very left underneath a four-way highway. We have separated the grade on our trail, our major trail, at all the 4-lane or 5-lane roads that it crosses or goes under. And so there you are, the before and the after. You see the detail in the architecture, too, and that was important to us. If the citizens are agreeing to put in tax money for that development, we can require detailed, interesting, good architecture, regardless of the style. And I think the style, we picked a very traditional form for the most part, because that was our community. That's what they wanted. Other communities may want different types of architecture, different styles of architecture. The key is that it's good, well thought out architecture, that whatever style it is, it's the best in its class. There's our concert hall at the top left. For those of you that may be in the field of architecture or history, that's inspired by the Villa Rotunda. It was built by, you've heard of Palladian windows? There was an architect and builder in the 1530s named Antonio Palladio. That's where the name Palladian windows come from. The round ones we see here in this room at the top. All those a little more arched. He did the rounded ones. He had built this fancy house outside of Venice because Venice was malaria-ridden in the summer, and the wealthy people would escape up to higher ground in the summer months. And this house is still standing. Jefferson used it as one of his inspirations, I think, when he designed Monticello. And so we chose that building made out of Indiana limestone from southern Indiana, so we tried to use local materials. We had to get a tile roof that actually could expand and contract with our freeze-thaw cycle that was made in the Midwest. So a lot of local materials in that building. These are plaza. The top one is in our city center. The bottom one is in the courtyard of one of the buildings in the Art and Design Center. We kept the courtyards as public property and have landscaped them. This one was landscaped just last year. Fountain. You see the ivy growing out of the planters. We have 2 fireplaces within this area. We saw about movable furniture, lots of movable furniture in this area. And I walk in every day, and we had finished this building about the end of the recession. We didn't have the money to do the landscaping. It was about $1 million, so we waited. We just finished it last summer. And it didn't see a lot of use. The minute we finished that landscaping, we started to see life and activity. I walk in any morning now at 8 o'clock in the morning or 7:30, see the residents have come down to have their coffee in the courtyard, business people coming to the area have grabbed their coffee and gone in there. They're working on their computers, they're talking business meetings in the summer, in the nice weather days. It's a great example of how working with good professionals who listened to the community, what they wanted, were able to build a very special place. These are, again, our pictures of our city center. The apartment building at the top has underground parking again. There's a famous deli, again, just brought it up to the street. When we first put these townhomes in, nobody in Indiana had built townhomes. That was something you did on the East Coast. It was about 18 years ago. The local realtors all said it's not going to work. People aren't going to want to go in their garage from the back. They're too close to the street. They sold out in 1/3 the time that the developer projected. Again, these are office buildings. Some of the first ones built in the city center. 2 levels of underground parking. Again, we would have had one 20,000 square foot building with surface parking. We got 5 20,000 square foot buildings with underground parking, and 5 times the tax revenue we would have had. There you go. There you can see the inside of the concert hall, our concert hall on the bottom, and the building that inspired it in Vicenza, Italy, in the top left. And this is really meant to be our anchor, our living room. Indianapolis has built every sports venue. They've got some teams you may have heard of, the Colts and the Pacers. And they built a cricket stadium last year. They have a velodrome, a bicycle racing arena, all these things for sports, which is good. It's been good economic development for Indianapolis. But we didn't have a dedicated concert hall. And so we decided to build one. It was a missing niche in the market. And we really intended it to be not only the community's living room, but the center of our new downtown as well. So there you see, this is city center. Those buildings, don't look like you're probably sitting in the middle of Indiana when you look at that bottom picture. And we think we've paid a lot of attention. Again, we're able to put bricks on the street and the sidewalk, flowers, nice lamppost, interesting architectural details. Because of the density that we're got, the intensity of use creates enough tax revenue that we're able to do that, where if it was all 1 story or 2 story sprawl, we would not be able to do it. There's a parking garage, just like nobody likes going on a special walk past the Walmart parking lot. parking garages fall in that category too. So if we don't wrap the entire building, which we've done a couple times, we at least take the bottom 2 levels, sell off that land, but require that people put retail or offices along it. So it becomes a more interesting walk, and it's just not dead space to the pedestrian. There's our trail. We try to keep a tree canopy over it. We have 188 miles of bike trail. A lot of it's alongside, above the curb line, and arterial and collector roads as well. Now, some of the men in spandex, I should say women too probably, I joke, the boys in spandex want to ride out with the cars and race them and that sort of thing. I'm joking. But some do. Some actually do, I think. But we thought, we're a family-oriented community, and we just thought it was a lot safer to put those bike paths up above the curb line, maybe 3 or 4 feet away from the vehicular portions of the road. This, though, is the dedicated trail. This is the one that used to be the railroad. We started a bike share, as did the university apparently, about 2 years ago. We used a company out of Cambridge, Mass. Called Zagster. And they have an interesting model. The city bought about 6 stations, but then we went to the private sector and said, you too can have a station for this amount of money and connect for your employees, for your apartment residents, for your office building, for your hospital, for your assisted living facility. We have 3 assisted living facilities that have Zagster stations for their residents, so the elderly can use our trail system. I have a former mayor of Carmel, Jane Ryman, who's now 87 and answers the phone for us every couple days a week, stays busy, and she knows where to send all the complaints. She's done it. And she said to me, as we're getting ready to do the bike show, I haven't been on a bike in about 10 years. She said, but I get on one of those big tricycles, I think. And so we called the company and said, could you make some tricycles for us? And they did. And then we found that not only did the elderly use them, a lot of autistic children that couldn't balance used them as well. And so we've made that segment of the population. The parents are thrilled that they can go on a bike ride with their kids, and they can, for a very small fee, use our bike share. So we're up to about 18 stations now, only 6 of them paid for by the city. And so we can keep expanding it by partnering with the private sector. That's out in front of City Hall on the 4th of July. We also have concerts. I can't stress how important it is to have community events every week in the good, even the bad weather months. Embrace the season, and we're adding an ice rink next year in front of the concert hall. I'm going to have it open from November 15th through about the middle of March. Just things to bring people together in the community, and that's so important to create that sense of pride and I think we have a fairly affluent community. I think about all the beautiful places on earth. I've been able to travel, see beautiful downtown, see beautiful cities in Europe and Asia and other places, but there's a lot of people that can't afford to travel like that, and they have every right to live in a place that's beautiful and inspirational and makes them want to do something special and feels like they live in a special place. And that's one of the reasons that good design and good placemaking is so important, is for those people that can't afford to go to San Diego or Paris or Vienna or Prague or wherever it might be. So back to that grid system that we don't have. We had that remember the mile grid system I was talking about? We did something different. Differently. I had done part of my grad work in England, and I saw these little funny circles that they were building over there. Drove on some of them the wrong way, of course. And I remember I think I had been elected mayor about 3 weeks, and I was driving with a friend of mine who's an accountant, and he pointed a bunch of pipe on the side of the road and said, "Do you know what that is?" And I said, "No." He said, "Is it water or sewer, or what's it for?" And he said, "You need to learn all this stuff." And elected officials do. I learned later I was looking at water pipe for a water system improvement. But I had to learn about it. I didn't have an engineering background or a planning background, so it was self-taught for the most part, lots of reading. One of the things that I had seen, though, in England was that those roundabouts handled a lot more traffic than our stoplights did. And just having driven them a little bit when I was over there and watching it, And so I called one of our consulting engineers in that was kind of the go-to guy. And I said, I want you to build these. He said, no, I won't put my professional stamp on it. They're tearing them out in New England. And I knew the old rotaries and big circles in New England were very different than what I had seen in England. So actually, one January day, it was snowing and cold and not much to do. I found my way to the Purdue University Engineering Library. I didn't know how to use a library. And so I found some articles that distinguish between roundabouts and rotaries. The roundabouts are smaller. It's counterintuitive. The smaller they are, the safer they are. Anybody in this audience ever go through a yellow light? Yeah, so that's okay. The guys downstairs all raised their hand, right? In that overflow room, and nobody here did. None of us have. Okay. But when that happens, you just speed it up. And so we know that 1 to 4 cars out of a million crash in any intersection on any continent. That's an international statistic. Whether it's Asia, Africa, South America, North America, Europe, doesn't matter. And so what happens that 1 to 4 out of a million? It doesn't sound like that many, but you've got 100,000 cars through a stoplight every day. That's 1 to 4 every 10 days. 50,000 cars, 1 to 4 every 20 days. You can do the math, figure it out. So what happens when you have that? And if people have sped up to go through that yellow light, and they hit the wrong lottery and have an accident, it's going to be a serious accident or fatality. The roundabouts, everyone has to slow down. And so what we have found, we have 102 now, more than any other city in the United States. And as a result, we've lowered our fatality rate by 90%, our injury accidents by 80%, and all accidents by 40%. That's huge. And then there's an environment, yeah. And the community loves them. You know, at the very beginning it was a little rough going, and I can tell those stories afterwards, but we built a new road and didn't tell anybody and just put some roundabouts on them. But then did a lot of public education. But it's probably not the way some of the experts would recommend you build consensus. But it worked. The community today is proud of their roundabouts. They're proud of the statistics. They're proud that we figured out a better way to do something. I couldn't take one out if I wanted to. The only arguments we get into is which neighborhood is going to get the next one. We have about 30 to go, and we have 28 of those funded. We're going to have one stoplight left, I think, when we're finished. And it's just in too small a place to do it. Here's another benefit that people didn't think about. Our city engineer pointed out to me one day he had estimated that each roundabout saves about 25,000 gallons of fuel per year. So take that times 102 times, $2.25. That's a lot of gasoline. And that's a lot of carbon and pollutants not going into the atmosphere. And so that's worked out well for us as well. And then the cost. Stoplight costs, $160,000, $170,000 a day installed? We don't have to pay for that. You can buy a lot of flowers and nice sculpture for that amount of money. And the fact that you don't have to power that light with electricity every year, and you don't have to adjust the timing. When an electric storm or tornado comes, you don't have to send the police officer out to direct traffic. They continue to work. They're better for pedestrians. They're better for bicyclists because everyone's going slower. A pedestrian, people say, how does a pedestrian get through a roundabout? Well, they walk out to that little triangular place. They only have to look in one direction. And it's going to be a mistake. I'd rather get hit by a car going 10 to 15 miles an hour than one going 50 miles an hour. It just speed it up. It's going to survive the 15-mile-an-hour crash, more than likely, even as a pedestrian. And if you do that, how many times, elected officials in the room, have you gotten a call about congestion being on a particular road or street? In the old days, I used to call the city engineer, ask her, Kate, what can we do to fix this? And in the beginning, the answer was always, well, let's add some lanes. And then we suddenly realized all we were doing was providing a bigger parking lot to get more cars through the green cycle of the light. And if we were able to move 4 to 5 times the number of cars through that intersection, we didn't have to add those lanes. And that's what roundabouts do. 4 to 5 times the amount of cars can go through per hour safely, more safely, than you can in a stoplight. So we found out that's how we retrofit that old mile grid system. We fix the intersections. We don't add all those lanes. And if you do that, you can add trees down the middle and get that tree canopy over the street going a lot faster. You can have enough right-of-way at the side of the road that you can have bike paths on both sides. So that's what we've done. That used to be a little, probably a 16-foot wide county road, tar and gravel originally, and then a little layer of asphalt over it. We tore it up and started over, which is what we've done on about 100 miles of our collector and arterials, and then put the curbs, storm sewers, bike path off to the side, see it on both sides. But you do that because you're able to have that median. People just go about the roundabout and come back to turn their driveway if they need to. There's another example. Now, there's our boundary with Indianapolis. We like Indianapolis, but they haven't done what we've done in terms of signs. Now, I was accused once of trying to make this look worse because it's a cloudy day looking south in Indianapolis and a blue sky day looking north into Carmel. But that is the same road. What's happened, the photographer has swiveled 180 degrees. And that's how a street can look with sign clutter and how one can look without sign clutter. We don't allow billboards. Community doesn't want billboards. And it is one of the fastest growing communities in the country. We get a lot of complaints from McDonald's who wants, a 20-foot higher sign than Burger King, and then Steak and Shake who wants the next 20-foot higher sign. We just say no. They can be 4 feet high. That's it. And on your property, nowhere else. And they still want to be there. It's amazing how that works. In fact, the higher the standards, the more business activity we tend to get, because people know that their investment's going to be protected. There's a new road we built. Again, you see the bike path off to the flag. We preserved the old growth forest in the middle. There's another lane on the other side of those daffodils. And then, another development where the townhomes have been brought up to the street. This is not Carmel. This is what we have to guard against. You imagine being in a wheelchair and trying to go out on the sidewalk and coming to this? Okay, what do I do now? Or even a walker or somebody trying to bicycle on the sidewalk. And we've got to get away. We've got to make sure we get street commissioners and civil engineers, people who design our cities, out of the habit of doing things like this. This is my favorite about walkable cities. Now, this is a smart crowd. I usually have to explain. See these guys? They're actually paying to go in there and get on an elliptical, but they're too lazy to walk up the stairs because they're not paying for it. I guess there's no value. And we know that it has to be somewhere in the warm weather because of the palm trees. This isn't Carmel either. Again, back to, is that where you want to go for a romantic walk with your husband or wife? I don't think so. And that, fortunately, is not Carmel. We don't allow big boxes to be built like that today. And here's one. Oops. Okay, there's what we did do at the bottom. I have some more pictures of it. It's a Dick's Sporting Goods store. You have that chain down here, don't you? Yeah, same thing. So we said to them, they weren't real excited about making all the cars park and back, but we said, well, you have two choices. Come to Carmel or not come to Carmel. If you want to come, this is the way we're going to require that you do it. And that's what's out in front of their store. It can be done. You can include big boxes and make them work. The cars and structures, in this case, are just in back of the buildings. This is not Carmel either. Can you imagine having a drink and trying to find the right house? Might be some unintended consequences. We can do better than this. And look at all those garages. Do I want to walk past that to see my neighbor, see who's out on the porch? Oh, wait a minute, there is no porch. Just snub-nosed garages facing the street. How anti-neighborly is that? It's terrible. But we've done this all over the United States. This is what we did. We put, in fact, we did a focus group when we built this Greenfield New Urbanism development. By New Urbanism, building it the way it would have been built prior to 1945 with alleys. But the developer did a focus group. It's a funny story. Asked people whether they wanted alleys. They said, oh, no, drug deals, broken glass, urchins, whatever that is. We don't want alleys. So they did a second focus group. So how about a lane in back of the house? The mail would go back there so you wouldn't have that ugly mailbox in front. The trash should be back there so it doesn't sit out in front of your house on trash day. You'd have picket fences, and roses would be a place to go out and talk over the fence to your neighbors. People said, great idea. Why didn't anybody ever thought of that? So this development doesn't have any alleys. They just have lanes. But you see the reduced setbacks. These are all new homes. And the price of those homes is about double per square foot for everything else in the city, except the Art and Design District, where we did that same thing in an existing neighborhood, where it's 3 times the average cost per square foot. Here we had a gas station on the main street, and we just put an overlay zone down that said the buildings had to be brought up to the street. And they said, but we're a gas station. And we said, yeah. So here we have one of the first gas stations ever with the pumps in back of the station, and the building is actually brought up to the street. I beat up on Kroger earlier for leaving us that abandoned retail strip. They did this as well next to their new store, so this is very nice. And we require, at that point, we required that all the buildings be at least 2 stories because the amount of infrastructure we had in the ground. To pay for it, we needed 2 stories. Today, we've raised it to 5 along that street. Here's an interesting design study. Abandoned service station in a residential neighborhood. Mechanic comes to me and says, I want to buy it, add a couple bays to it, and start a mechanic shop. And you see how it looked. It already looked pretty bad. And, they sold pumpkins there at Halloween and firecrackers there. It was a pop-up shop. And basically abandoned except for those pop-up shops that came in. And so I said to the mechanic, I said, weren't you really working on a place you're really proud of? And he said, well, sure. And I said, give me a week and come back and see me. And so I had one of the city's architects sketch a building up on the street, 2 levels, with all the bays facing the back, and showed it to him. And he said, well, I can never pay for that second story. I said, but I've got a software firm, and I think would lease it from you. You'd like to meet them. And so we helped them find a bank, helped the mechanic find a bank, helped the software company enter into a lease with him, built the building, and that's what we got. That's the way the picture on the bottom right is the way it looks in the street today. The picture on the bottom left is the way it looks in the back of the building. But it's such a much better way to do it than what would have happened had the city not intervened and encouraged a partnership. So we've already talked about the roundabouts. We've talked about the safety, cost, environment, design, pedestrians. You see how the pedestrians can cross 1 car length back from the yield bar, but they only have to go halfway, and they only have to look one direction till they get to that island, and they look the other direction. The bicyclists can go through at about the same speed as a car, or they can take the path off to the side if they don't want to be in traffic. Of course, the local paper had a lot of fun with our roundabouts. Apparently, it's me on Halloween being scared by the pumpkin that tells us it's Halloween, and being scared by a stop sign. Now, the local resident who draws these cartoons for a local paper claims he voted for me and is a friend. There's one of our new roundabouts at the bottom. There it is, another one after it's been landscaped. We're trying to landscape or public sculpture and everyone. Oh, there's another one. This is the day the NCAA brackets came out. I never thought I was that short or fat, but they drew me barely coming over the top of the desk. My kids were in high school at the time. I guess it was on my one son's locker for about 3 months. He thought it was pretty funny. I have this slide to show, yes, trucks can get around roundabouts, fire trucks can get around roundabouts. Our fire department's been our biggest supporter because they don't pull as many dead people and as many seriously injured people out of wrecks as they used to. And they often get calls from other cities because fire departments are afraid we can't get our equipment around it. And they say, no, wait a minute. First of all, you're not going to need, you reduce your fatalities by 90%, your injuries by 80%. And if you drive slowly enough, you can get fire equipment around every one of our roundabouts. You notice that we do put about for truck drivers that miss, we put about try it too fast, we do put about 6 to 8 feet of masonry on the inner diameter and a rolled curb, so when we don't have to redo the lawn quite as often. And then we did roundabout interchanges. This is an interesting story, and I'll be brief. We had this, what is it, 35 that kind of cuts through your city? Yeah, we have two roads that do. And this was a state road. We had 6 big ugly stoplights like that. That was taken about 5 in the morning, and there's already traffic. It'd often be, if you're trying to go crossways from one side of town to the other, from the east to west, just like here, you might have a 6, 7, 8 minute wait. And so we figured out that we could do these roundabout interchanges, lower the main line. This is a Great Wall of China. You notice there aren't any crosswalks down here in the bottom left. It was impossible to cross safely as a pedestrian. Maybe at 3 in the morning you could. But now you can walk right across on the path that runs along it. We also found, you do a tight diamond interchange. That diamond isn't all that tight if you've got a lot of traffic, so you have to keep drawing that diamond farther out. You get off on the ramps or get the on-ramps, and you come to a stoplight, but those 2 stoplights on either side have to be far enough apart for the busiest time they don't back up into the other stoplight. Because of the constant flow at the roundabouts, we actually calculated this. Had we done tight diamond interchanges to fix this road, we would have taken 46 houses. We had to take 3 doing it this way. We saved these neighborhoods. The state was going to come along and add, it was an F-rated highway with school grades. They were going to get it up to a D+. In 10 years, it was going to be an F again by their own projections. We got it to a B+, and we think it should stay there for all time. So we got the state. We had a very good governor at the time, Mitch Daniels, and I said, Governor, you have to plow this road every day forever, right? For the next 1,000 years, yeah? You have to maintain it. He said, no, you don't. You can give it to us. We wanted to control it. And I said, you're going to spend $45 million just widening the road, adding these lanes to it, which would destroy these neighborhoods. We have a better plan. Give us $90 million. We'll take the road forever. And he said, deal. And so we got the road, $90 million check. We spent about $110 million on the project, and the community absolutely loved it. But we really got outside the box to try to do something that hasn't been done much in the U.S. That sounded like a hook trying to get me on stage. Let's see, where are we? So here are some of the rules we used. We try to not pay too much attention to zoning these days. We understand why it was used years ago. Doesn't mean we don't have rules dealing with how things are done, but we don't segregate uses, because that leads to people driving from one side of town to the other, back to the other side, because the stores are here, the houses are here, the schools and churches and synagogues are over here. Everybody's driving from place to place. We try to mix it up so people can walk most places. We're trying to make sure that people can walk everywhere they need to go on a daily basis, or if it's bad weather, at least a short drive. Hierarchy of buildings. Public buildings, public architecture, like this beautiful building, ought to inspire and uplift people. We try to pay attention to that. We try to build our buildings in harmony with the land, built surroundings, use local materials, try to build at a human scale. That means we don't want skyscrapers either. We think that 5 to 6 levels is about right. There's a fellow out at UCLA named Dr. Richard Jackson, MD, has done research about getting the same bad mental and physical health impacts that you get with sprawl, and those have been documented for years. You get over about 6 or 7 stories, the same thing starts to happen. If you're interested in that subject, Dick Jackson, Richard Jackson, it's worth reading some of his work. Enclosures, as we try to build our piazzas, our plazas, our courtyards, try to get them built to a human scale, try to pay attention to what works, talk to the people in the neighborhood, as we discussed this morning. Have them enclosed on 3 sides or 4 sides. There's a great book by one's the late husband, Henry Leonard, and his wife, who's an architect, British architect, Suzanne Leonard. She lives in Portland now. She wrote a book called The Genius of the European Public Square. And she and her husband, when he was alive, he did it from a psychological point of view, and she did it from an architectural point of view, looked at thousands of piazzas and plazas and courtyards across Europe and South America, traditional courtyards and plazas, and tried to figure out what worked and what didn't work. And it was a sense of enclosure that was one of the key points she got from her research. That book's worth reading, too. Pay attention to aesthetics. Most developers and builders want to build something they're proud of. Ask them, demand it, demand a higher standard of architecture, building materials. And don't be afraid of density or intensity of use. People don't like density in this country because we've done it so poorly. But if we can start doing it, we have a lot of credibility with our citizens now. When I say we want to do something at 5 or 6 stories, we get a shrug. They say, is it going to look like that other building you did? And I say, yes. They say, great, that's fine. They're comfortable with the density. They weren't 20 years ago, but they are now because they see the quality of our projects. And we try to learn from thousands of years of city design. As much as we like to think there's a lot of new things out there that we've come up with, there really aren't that many. And we need to look back in history and find the best ways to build a city. And that's what we've tried to do in our city, is build a place that people are proud of because of its design and the way it looks and feels and operates. That it's one of the best places. You know, people have a choice where they choose to spend their lives, especially the well-educated business owners. If we want them to come to a place like Carmel, Indiana, in the middle of a hot plain in the summer and rough winter, with no mountains and no oceans, we've got to build a special city because they have choices where they choose to live their lives. And we know that we can't attract the best and brightest employees. We won't be able to attract the best employers. So that's what we've tried to do in our city. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate being here today. Do we have time for questions?
What an inspiring example. At this time, I'd like to invite Sky Singleton up to lead us in the singing of the OU chant. Where's Sky? Okay, good. Whew. You do not want to hear me sing. As an undergraduate, Sky was named Outstanding Senior in the School of Music. She's performed internationally. She's the winner of the Marilyn Horn Award, and she's currently pursuing a master's in voice with an emphasis in opera. Sky, would you please lead us in the singing of the OU chant?
Our chant rolls on and on. Thousands strong join heart and song in alma mater's praise. Of campus beautiful by day and night, of